I think from the IVA experience, really learning, especially for early stage companies, that angel investing is a very people centric business, especially for early stage companies. And it very often boils down to founders and their team. And we kept hearing also during the academy course, it's like the founders. So, what do the founders stand for? What principles do they live and work by? With whom they're surrounding and building their team with? Because, and we've seen this also, I think more often than not, the core team carrying the startup is often more critical than the product that they seek to build in the early stages. Things that come to mind or values that come to mind when very often when we're assessing our founders are like whether they have the grit, the resilience, are they intellectually rigorous? Are they also open? Do they have the conviction to carry their beliefs through and fundamentally purpose driven?
Hi, folks. Welcome back to On Call with Insignia, where we go on call with leaders innovating the future of Southeast Asia's internet and digital economy, as we like to call it, as innovation. I'm your host, Paolo Aquino. And as you can see with my background, for those tuning in via video, that we're doing a Academy Afterthoughts episode where we talk to alumni and mentors and different people who have been part of this community that we've built over the past 2-3 years now of people learning about venture capital through our 12-week experiential program. And in this particular Afterthoughts episode, I have with me Geraldine Se, who is an alumnus of Cohort 1. So really the pioneering cohort, and it's great to catch up with her again after all this time. So thanks for coming on the show, Geraldine.
Thanks, Paulo. Thanks for having me. And I'm really grateful and honored to be given this opportunity.
Yeah, just a quick line about Geraldine before we head into our discussion today. So she's had quite a career going through many different industries, I'd say, going from consulting, PwC, and investment banking with Macquarie, and then jumped into the tech team, joining eCommerce for a bit, and then going into Lazada, where she held leadership positions there, executive positions across strategy, management, all of that. And then at some point, she decided to join IVA, Insignia Ventures Academy. Really happy that she did, and that's why she's here in this particular episode. But I wanted to kick things off, Geraldine, by asking you like what you were doing just before you joined IVA, in particular at Lazada, and what background, what were the stuff that you carried with you before jumping into the program?
Yeah, so before joining IVA, I was leading the health and beauty category vertical in Lazada Singapore and subsequently leading the corporate strategy team. But prior to that, with most Lazadians, we move around a portfolio of roles. So yeah, I was doing all of that before deciding to join the IVA program.
And then so at that point, dialing back, you were leading the health and beauty categories you mentioned in Lazada, and prior to that you had been at e-commerce and Macquarie. So how did you find out about IVA, Insignia Ventures Academy, and what made you decide to join the program at that point in time in your career?
Interestingly, I think I was initially approached by Gail, who was previously with Insignia, and she introduced me to the structure and framework of the program, which had piqued my interest. And it came at the right time because it was exactly what I was looking for at that time, because I was looking to further my lifelong learning journey. That's one. And second, I think for me, it's always been a desire and passion to be further embedded to the startup
Mm.
ecosystem in Southeast Asia and beyond to see where I can value add in and create impact through.
Was there any particular area that you discovered you could make more impact in through joining the program versus your understanding of what you could do in the ecosystem prior to joining the program?
The ability to influence founders and sharing knowledge that
Mm.
I've had from seeing businesses make either successful moves or mistakes and sharing that with them because I think many of these founders are also first time founders and may not have had much experience delving into the space that they're in. So I think the ability to share that knowledge with them was something that I think I wouldn't have had as much opportunity to before IBA.
And I'm sure you're definitely talking to a lot of founders during the program.
Yes,
Uh,
that's indeed a lot.
and yeah, maybe you can share a little bit because I often ask the alumni who come on the show like what team they were a part of in their cohort. Um,
Yeah. So I was
yeah.
in the EduTech team together
Mm-hmm.
with Hester, Harsh, Abbas, and Toku. I think that's it. I don't think I missed out any. But the whole
Hopefully not.
probably not. But that was the team that I was in. So we were delving into the edutech vertical within IVA, and our cohort mates also had different verticals that they were specializing in.
Right.
So we had teams in the B2B SaaS, in advertising tech, in biotech, I think, health tech, fintech. So there was much to be exposed to and learn from beyond my teammates and yeah, in the wider area amongst my cohort mates.
And what was the, I guess, like given the fact that you had come from e-commerce and then you were in the edutech team, what was the biggest learning in particular about the vertical during that journey of yours in the IVA? Does it still come to mind?
I think that the one of the biggest differences is that edutech, especially for K-12 and below, your consumers are different from your users. Where else in e-commerce is quite straightforward. Your
Right.
purchasers are very often also your users. Where else there's the added complexity and dimension in edutech where you have parents' consideration and you also have your kids' engagement and learning and outcomes that you have to measure your success on. So that was quite interesting for me to learn.
Seems intuitive, I guess, from a consumer's point of view. But then when you're looking at all these like businesses, I guess it's something easy to miss. When it comes to your overall IVA experience, right? Not just the IC meetings and working in the edutech space. What was the highlight? What would you say was the highlight of your whole experience?
Yeah, when I was reflecting on the questions you gave me, I think this was what excited me the most. There was so many highlights, I think,
Brought you
of
down memory
the
lane.
yes, the IPA experience. Of course, I'll go into the IC preparations later, but I think for me, I think first and foremost was the ability to form new bonds and relationships with my cohort mates. We had come together from various walks of life, differing objectives, and were able to find kinship through our assignments, preparing for ICs and group study evaluations. So I think one of the more poignant streams and activities was being part of the leadership discovery stream, which forced the team inevitably and invariably to be open and vulnerable with each other. And everyone had differing comfort levels in sharing insights, right, about experiences, but it did bring us closer together. So I really appreciated that. So the other highlight and what was interesting was the fact that we were the pioneer cohort and being part of the program also meant that the program was open to feedback from us as participants and was also open to iterations. So that was refreshing and welcoming to me because everyone was all learning and experimenting and embarking on this journey for the first time to, I think, where IBA is today has been a journey. The other highlight was the entire duration of the course was held fully online during COVID times as the pioneer cohort. So that made it particularly memorable because we had to self-organize, attend, and actively participate in these sessions remotely, separately in our homes after work hours, which could be challenging at times, especially after a long day of work and home commitments. But in spite of all of that, we were still able to forge deep and meaningful bonds. I'd like to think and say, and hopefully my teammates would say the same. Definitely felt like a mini MBA at the end of this.
I think we definitely learned a lot from you guys, the first cohort in particular. And yeah, thanks to the hard work that you put in and all the feedback that you gave us, you're able to keep doing this. And now coming into our, as of recording this, we're in our fifth cohort. So definitely a lot more folks like yourself who are going through, who have gone through these experiences. And interestingly enough, like you mentioned, you talked about the leadership. I call it the side quest in this in this
Side quest,
program.
indeed.
It's not really it's not I would say it's not really part of the curriculum, but I think it's one of the more personal and meaningful parts of the program. Many folks have been on the show, on the Academy Afterthoughts series, say that definitely was like a highlight for them. So adding you to that list also.
Yeah.
And you've talked about learning from diving into the edutech space, but having been part of, I guess, the strategy, development, and growth of companies like eCommerce and Lazada, which are definitely like considerable organizations and companies in their own right. I guess what was something that you were able to take away from IVA that I guess maybe was something that you think you may not have gotten from your past like experiences or something that subverted your thinking that you came in with?
You're right. Interestingly, I think coming from mature tech companies, some of these things that I've learned from IBA don't necessarily come to mind or come to fore. And a few of these are, and it's also helped me to shape and refine my thinking when evaluating businesses. So a few of these are really understanding what it is that a founder or the team is trying to solve. What problem is it that they're trying to solve? What need does this address? And then we kept hearing during IBA calls like your TEM, SEM, SOM, size of the potential demand for
Right.
your product, which I think to this day, I use that to frame thinking when approaching issues and opportunities because the consumers and your stakeholders to launch a product or a new business are usually your most important because you need them to buy
Mm,
into your idea and you have to understand what it is that they face, what pain points do they face, and what is it that your product is trying to address. So I think for me that was one of the biggest, a clearest learning point that I
mm,
took away.
right.
Simple, but I think sometimes we forget how critical that is. Because you can
Yeah,
build the
yeah.
most fanciful product, but if nobody, it's not solving anyone's problem, it's not going to gain any traction, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really, I guess, a benefit of working with early stage founders, perhaps, or looking at a lot of early stage companies, or even starting something from scratch or from nothing. Like you're really forced to think about why you're doing this. What's the first principles? What's the
Yes, first
fundamental
principles. That's right.
problem that you're trying to solve, compared to say being in a growth stage company where sort of the problem is already established and it's
Yeah,
already understood across the organization what you're trying to do.
sometimes.
Um,
But yes,
sometimes,
yeah,
yeah. I guess there's that shared delusion.
yeah. In
Sure.
periods of abundance, there
Yeah.
is always that veneer of delusion. Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, there is that benefit of looking at things from when companies are still early on and trying to understand that aspect of it. And we always like to point at people apply to VC jobs or get venture jobs, but it's definitely not the only outcome that we've seen in the many cohorts that we've done. And some of them might not even be necessarily like a job change, right? So for yourself, like how did the IVA experience impact your own career, especially as somebody who has held like exec positions at mature tech companies after the program?
I think the IBA experience has exposed me to a breadth of industries and verticals and technology and learning about them through this program where I would not necessarily and typically would have the opportunity to come across. So I think that makes for a very rich knowledge base, like coming across companies or problems that founders are trying to solve for in biotech, in agri-tech, which may not be so applicable in Singapore, but I think in some of our surrounding Southeast Asian countries, fem health, B2B SaaS businesses.
I think like you mentioned about your team being in edutech, but then your teammates all coming from different like
Yeah,
verticals as well, and I'm sure that was
that's right. That's
where
right.
that was where this sort of stems on, I feel. And also obviously I hope you got the chance to also connect with many other cohort members outside of your own team and really see like another thing I wanted to emphasize also is that even as people are like looking for startups within their own sort of verticals or teams, you guys also get to watch and see the progress of other teams as well, right?
Yeah.
And learn from their pitches. Yeah, so you mentioned about really getting exposed to different industries and verticals, and I was wondering like how that ties into your hat as an angel investor. Were you angel investing already before you joined IVA, or was that something
Yes.
that you got into after?
I had started a little bit before IVA in one or two companies, but not heavily, and mostly only in the consumer space because that was where I was
Right.
most familiar with anyway. But I think how this helped as an angel investor was not just the exposure, but also learning about what are some of the success matrices to look out for
Mm.
in the various verticals when assessing opportunities. So that was very helpful for me. And I think for me, seeing how the Southeast Asian tech landscape has become a lot more vibrant and so much more different business models surfacing is quite exciting for me. So, witnessing, for example, many and much more use cases of AI and machine learning in this part of the world. which you never really quite hear of or come across before, at least from my limited perspective. And hearing that these use cases can be whether it's for training or medical diagnosis, supply chain management, mental wellness, that have the potential to have tangible and widespread impact. So I think that's really exciting. I think for me also seeing the transformation in Southeast Asia, at least in the past 10 years, where maybe a decade or 2 decades ago, again, in my limited exposure, the kind of early stage companies being like a run of the mill marketplace app models, and us having evolved from that. But back then, that seemed to be the representation of innovation, right? But we have gone so much and progressed so much more beyond that these days.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a lot more business models, a lot more, I guess, industries that you would, I guess, maybe even investors back then would have considered to be too difficult to digitalize, or it would take super maybe like too long beyond the fun life to actually see happen. But now that has definitely changed, as you mentioned. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into how specifically like your IVA experience in particular has impacted your own, having done a few investments prior, like how it has changed. Obviously you talked about wider scope, right? But anything else, that any other impact that the experience has had on your angel investing?
Yeah, I think from the IDA experience, really learning, especially for early stage companies, that angel investing is a very people centric business, especially for early stage companies. And it very often boils down to founders and their team. And we kept hearing also during the academy course, it's like the founders. So, what do the founders stand for? What principles do they live and work by? With whom they're surrounding and building their team with? Because, and we've seen this also, I think more often than not, the core team carrying the startup is often more critical than the product that they seek to build in the early stages. Things that come to mind or values that come to mind when very often when we're assessing our founders are like whether they have the grit, the resilience, are they intellectually rigorous? Are they also open? Do they have the conviction to carry their beliefs through
Mhm.
and fundamentally purpose driven? Yeah.
Is there, I guess, in your experience though so far? I mean, obviously, I would think that this is also like a learning process for anybody
Yeah.
doing angel investing. But in your experience so far, is there anything that you ask in particular to founders or do in particular in terms of DD to flesh these characteristics out, especially since they're very, it's hard to be tangible about it compared to
Yes, it is.
other aspects of a company. Yeah,
It is. And it does sound a little woo woo. So it does boil down to that. I don't have fixed set of questions that
right.
I ask, but it's really assessing how they take failure and what impact is it that they seek to achieve to
Mhm.
get a sense of how purpose driven or principle driven they are. Yeah. Because the same words can be said by different people but mean different things. So it's usually through the face to face and
Yeah.
upfront interaction where we are able to test this well.
And yeah, you did go back to that whole concept of the problem that you're trying to solve, and that whole first principle thing that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, I think that's really important to take note of. Another aspect of angel investing that I wanted to touch on was the fact that you have had a career working at mature tech companies. So I wonder, what is the synergy there in terms of how it impacts your angel investing and vice versa?
One of the questions you asked earlier was the kind of impact that I seek to create. And one of which I think is the luxury of having some of these resources that some of the early stage or first time founders may not necessarily have access to, and offering them up, whether it's relationships, networks, potential capital sources from connections that they can leverage on, introductions, connections, and referrals, I think can be helpful to founders, I hope. Yeah. And where possible, I think sharing knowledge and learning lessons, influencing the founders so that they can also go on to do that with their team and create bigger impact through their work in their teams and in the businesses that they seek to run and build, especially having, I think, seen maybe more success cases in the States that similar businesses have made before, which may
Right.
help them shortcut their processes. and prevent like loss of time and resources, which is critical for founders, right? Because as founders, I can imagine on a day-to-day basis, they are living with some form of scarcity or enabling them to shortcut the experimentation process and equipping them with that knowledge so that they can have a greater chance for success. I think is meaningful to me, and I think is how I think this whole experience has also given me the opportunity to in angel investing.
Is there a particular area of that whole like experimentation process that you notice like founders ask you in particular, or that the kind of advice that you give? Like, is it mostly around product, or is there like specific functions that they ask about?
Yeah, I think because of my background coming from Lazada, many of these founders or startup owners are either hesitant to get a head start into entering the marketplace for fear of brand
Mm,
dilution. So they always ask
mm.
lots of questions around that before making a decision. And interestingly, what I've noticed is not so much around financial returns that they're concerned about or the financial investment, but they're very concerned about like brand dilution and how much control they'll be able to have over their business.
That's pretty interesting that yeah, that's from your perspective, that's something that they're really concerned about from the get-go. And it is something that I guess if you're not careful can really creep up on you in terms of the whole ownership and getting diluted and all of that if you're not careful. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask you like how coming from corporate finance and consulting has also shaped how the your approach or thinking when it comes to building a company from the ground up. Does any of your experiences from that part of your career influence the way that, like work with founders, for example, as an angel investor?
Maybe not so much the technical aspect, but I think the mental models and the framework picked up and the rigor from investment banking and on and all consulting has helped. I think it attunes my mind to be analytical first and foremost and rely on the numbers where possible. I know it's quite difficult in early stage startups, but rely on numbers where possible to make decisions, maximizing for growth and efficiency, and to always have that lens where possible because that impacts your returns, right? Whether financially or whether from a human capital or whether from a time capital standpoint. I think that's helpful. And having the same lens applied to business use cases and assessing what kind of options to be pursuing, I think that's helped.
Yeah, would you say like really like a discipline in a sense to
Discipline, yeah.
discipline for details and numbers for decision making? So that leads me to our corner minute masterclass. Since you've been sharing a lot of these learnings from your career, it's a question we ask all our guests so far in this season. If you were to give a masterclass on a specific topic, I guess with regards to company building, and the students are entrepreneurs or operators, you can imagine maybe some of the early stage founders that you work with. Like, what topic would you focus on, and what would be the one key takeaway that you would want them to take away from your class?
I think the topic would be around navigating chaos because I think to succeed in startup, you will need to learn to navigate chaos because I've learned you can never remove it or avoid it because there's so much ambiguity and you are starting something new, fresh, unproven, and you need to put yourself out there to prove that and make this work. And very often, I can imagine the magnitude is so much bigger for startup founders because your face is competing priorities daily. You have scarcity of resources. You don't always have answers to the scenarios you're faced with. And then how, as an individual, do you best manage the situations? So this book I picked up quite many years ago, and I couldn't
Mm.
quite appreciate this when I was in banking because the banking environment is very structured, very secure, very stable. And I didn't quite appreciate it until very much later in my career, like now. But I still fall back to this, which is learning agility. And I think Korn Ferry was the one that built this framework in their HR, what's that? OB, HROB, or HR
Mm.
organizational behavior.
Behavior.
Yeah. And it centers around 5 pillars. And every single pillar, you have exercises to practice on to exercise that muscle, like you mentioned before. So, pillars around self awareness, mental agility, people agility, change agility around experimentation, and results agility. So, driving results when you have imperfect information, and how do you go about doing that in a manner that you are confident of? So I think one example would be around, I think, change agility, uh, which is driving for results and not being afraid to experiment. Because when situations are ambiguous, you very often can find many ways to achieve similar outcomes. And top of mind, I think, for many founders these days are in driving efficiencies because there's financial impact to the business, especially now that we're not really living in periods of abundance. So experimentation is key. And with some of the startups and businesses that I've worked with and been in, examples like experimenting with certain commercial levers to optimize for sales efficiency, or looking at diversification of marketing channels, especially when certain marketing channels, matrices are not able to be measured, isn't always clear or known. And having to take a punt right on and relying on intuition and common sense to achieve this, especially when you're trying to target customers that you may not have reached before, but may have some affinity to your product. For example, a product that we were launching in Thailand, one of my previous experiences, we were typically only looking at tier one cities and customers within Bangkok because they had the willingness to pay for the price of our product. But we never realized that in the tier two cities are just 1 hour and 2 hours away from Bangkok, there was also a potential market of consumers that also had the financial ability to pay for the
Mm,
product, but
right.
lived further away from the city that did not have access to the product that we had, but had greater willingness to pay because of the lack of accessibility. And this was untapped that we had to try to reach and acquire. So that also meant different sorts of approaches to reach them and diversifying our marketing channels to help drive down costs. All of these would not have been discovered if we weren't open to ideas, we weren't open to experiment, we weren't able, if we weren't open to challenge our own mental models of how the business used to be run. Yeah, I think would be a good example, I think, of demonstrating change agility.
I think yeah, two interesting points that you brought up. One is the whole navigating chaos. I think I heard from somewhere that one of the most important skills an entrepreneur should have is to be able to choose which problems to solve.
Oh,
Because there are so
yeah.
many, and you sum that up in your answer, right? Talking about there are so many different problems that you have to juggle and a lot of different uncertainties. Entrepreneurs are only human, right? And then they manage human
Mm,
organizations. So there's only so much that they can solve at every point in time. It's choosing what really matters to the business. And I think,
mm,
yeah, so navigating chaos is actually, I wouldn't underestimate it as a topic for founders to learn about. And the second point is your story about the whole, I guess, discovering markets that you may not have been looking at in the first place is really
mm.
important as well because you would sometimes when we talk about product market fit, people already have a conception of, oh, this is the market that I want to target and
Yeah,
have all
that's
their
right.
bias
That's
just for
right.
that
Yes.
market
Yeah.
and try to optimize for that, not realizing that could also be a variable, like even in your story, right? That
Yeah.
you could have other customers
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
and you might be missing out on them. Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. I think really important considerations and lessons for founders to have, especially during this time. And on that note, I guess we can relax a little bit as we head into a rapid fire round. The fun part, as I like to say. So just some chill questions. No need to take too seriously and just to give some short and sweet answers. So the first one is, what digital technology or innovation excites you the most today?
I think it would really be machine learning and AI. I know it's overused, but it is exciting to see how some of these use cases have the potential to evolve to ease our workload, but also scary to see how this may impact us. And for me, it's always thinking about how to still remain relevant in the next
Hmm.
10 years and ensuring
Right.
that our children and the next generations being equipped with future proof skills.
Next question. If you were to be invited to produce a Netflix show or OT show, like what would be the title? And what would be like your one liner for the show?
Yeah, so there's recently a new Netflix series. It's called Queen Maker,
Yeah, is
the
this the
Korean
the
K
Korean drama?
drama.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's already taken up, but I think I would use that because it
Hmm.
was good me in my show. And the log line would be ensuring the wheels keep turning to help the people around me and the teams I manage to succeed.
So it would be like inspired by the true story of Geraldine. so,
The
some
war
years from now,
stories. Yeah,
war
war
stories. Yeah.
stories to share. But yeah,
Looking back now, what is a skill? Could be a soft skill or hard skill that you believe you should have learned back in your time as a student.
yeah. I think it's the underrated skill of self-reflection and
Mm.
self-awareness, which also translates to self-management. Again, I know it sounds woo. A lot of what I've shared might be a little woo-woo, but I've seen how that skill and that muscle has built wisdom in many senior leaders that I admire and respect, especially living through these times. I think the ability to be self-reflective, self-learn, and self-improve is very important. Other skills, I think thinking critically and thinking creatively in the workplace. I don't think the Singapore system is quite primed for that, but it's critical. And we've touched on this a fair bit, but it's adaptability and flexibility in finding answers in uncertain and complex environments.
Yeah, these are important things for sure. And even though they might sound woo, as to quote you, I think
Not technical, but it's important. Yeah.
yeah, but the reason that they are is because they're very personal and very circumstantial. It's hard to paint in a single brushstroke, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And we've talked about machine learning and AI. That technology can very easily replace replicable and repeatable skills. But I think soft skills and skills that require a lot more people discernment and people interaction, that can't be replaced. So that needs to
Right.
be something that needs to be enhanced, I think. So who's gonna self-reflect for us? ChatGPT isn't. So we have to do that for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, they it could try, but I'm not sure we'll be happy
I
with
don't
the
know.
answers.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your favorite go-to destination in Southeast Asia? Or do you have a particular trip that you're looking most forward to taking in the region?
Yeah, I think Southeast Asia would be Vietnam for
Mm.
the diversity of landscape. You can find mountains, beaches, lakes, cities, all in one country. Really appreciate the freshness of the food and the upward growth of the economy. And I think the good of the people, I think it's quite exciting for me. Myanmar potentially also as a next travel destination. Yeah.
And then what's your favorite activity to de-stress?
High intensity interval training, hit exercises, meditation, and I think enjoying new experiences with my husband, whether
Mhm.
it's hiking, trying new foods, or discussing about businesses.
Of course. Is your husband in the space as well?
Yeah, so he's a relatively active angel investor. He
Mm.
used to work in the corporate finance or corporate development function for a tech firm, and now he's running his own business. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Anything that you've read or taken up recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, don't know whether it's relevant for the listeners. We can cut this out. But what is interesting to me now, okay, personal. So I like to read across variety of topics, so not necessarily only the angel investing or tech space, but a couple, right, across fiction and nonfiction. So fiction, what I'm reading now is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. It's historical fiction based off a crime that slowly unravels itself. And her style of writing is quite unique for me, and I
She was
quite
the one who
enjoy
wrote
it.
the
Yes,
Handmaid's Tale.
yeah,
Okay, but it's like a
yes.
different story altogether.
Different, like quite
Different.
dystopian.
Okay.
I haven't read that, but she has quite a unique style of, I would
Mm.
almost say, quite dark and gothic writing. Very it draws me in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. And then two other nonfiction books. One is, and I toggle between several books at a time, depending on like the mood and flavor of the day. But one I'm rereading When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanisi, but a neurosurgeon who discovers he has stage 4 cancer, and particularly moving and personal. I did cry. I think I'm not shy to say I cried at a few points, but
Mm-hmm.
it provokes one into thinking about, pursuit for purpose, meaning, and greater calling. What do we live for in this world? Again, it's philosophical, but I think it's important to clarify that for our own selves. I think on days where I feel a bit disturbed, when the next book is on days where I feel a bit disturbed by what's going on in the world, it's the Ray Dalio's Changing World Order. It sort of makes sense of what's happening around. But I think for
Does it comfort you amidst all the
no,
chaos?
yes, He has very gloomy views.
Yeah, I mean, I would
Um,
think
but
it's entirely the opposite, right? Like,
yeah, he's very
like
gloomy
this has
views of
happened before. It's gonna happen again. It's gonna keep
exactly.
happening.
All right. I
Yeah,
mean, in summary, that's kind of the booklet,
yeah,
but in
yeah.
much greater technical
Sorry for the
details.
spoilers, guys, but yeah.
And it goes in
Uh,
cycles. You're exactly right. But I think more relevant, especially in
mm,
these times where we bear witness to some of the global power dynamics changes and the shifting world orders or new world orders establishing.
right. Thanks for sharing. Like, I'm sure our listeners will definitely, have a lot to check out after this call. Not just the books, but also some of the frameworks that you shared earlier today about navigating chaos and all that. And of course, also Insignia Ventures Academy. If any of them have become interested after hearing your story,
I
and
hope I didn't scare any of them off.
or maybe challenge, but like
Yeah.
we sometimes get folks who think that is it really that hard, and then they join, and then
And then,
yeah, I'll leave
and
that
then
for you
Rush
guys
like,
to figure out. Yeah, but yeah, I mentioned earlier that we are going through cohort 5, but our
yeah,
sixth
it's
cohort
exciting.
is currently recruiting and open for application. So I'll leave a link in the description for you guys to check that out if you are interested. In the meantime, thanks so much again, Geraldine, for coming on our Academy
No, thank
Afterthought
you.
show.
It's been my
And
pleasure.